I was sitting here obviously thinking about change and what I'm going to talk about. Well, I knew that before I got up here, I think. But anyway, what happened is I have these new hearing aids. And I was sitting there and I was thinking now, I wasn't blaming, but I'm thinking, Courtney, you got this wrong because, boy, the music is just driving me crazy this morning. Not the voice, the music. And then I took out my app. And on that app, it says live music. And I switched to live music, and it sounded perfect. See? So I'm using change, if you would, to manage my life more comfortably. Nothing wrong with music at all. You know, one of the things that's interesting is we're talking about change, and we're talking about coping with change, and there's some things in change that we have no control over. For example, during this morning, you're going to have about 500,000 cells die as you sit here. And 500,000 will invent themselves and come back. All right? Did you know that during the next 5 days, that your stomach lining will change 100%? That in the next 6 weeks, your liver will change 100%? That every 3 months, the skeleton in your body changes? The brain takes a little longer, about a year and a half, some people think, to change. Totally change because the cells in your body are constantly dying and then coming back, dying and coming back. And yet, you and I don't resist that. Matter of fact, one of the most interesting things I've read recently is that probably around 2030, I said it again, but around 2030, what's going to happen is that if you have a liver problem, they will print out a liver on a 3D machine and use it and transplant it into your body. And that will be true of many organs in the body. So get ready to live longer because change is coming, and some of it we will say, thank you, God, and other parts we're going to say, what in the world, God? So last week we talked about preparing for change, and we talked about the fact that there are states of being where we are in the current state of being, where we're really comfortable. Then comes the transition where we become uncomfortable. And then the future change takes place, and we're now living in the future, and we're very comfortable with that because we've adjusted to it. And just about the time we've adjusted to that, then there's new change coming along, okay? And we've gotten comfortable with the current, now got to go through the transition again. And life is like that. Heraclitus was a famous philosopher in Greek prior to Socrates, and he had a couple of statements that I think are pretty interesting about change. One, he said that you cannot step into the same river twice. You cannot step into the same river twice. The second one, which I picked up a little later, was that the path to up and down is the same path. He was one of the earlier philosophers who was really saying that everything is one, that there's not duality, there is oneness. And so as we look at what he said, we understand also that Buddha had some ideas about this idea of change. He said that life is impermanent. And one of the major reasons for all of our grief is that we wish things were not impermanent. We wish things would stay the same. So you know that, and I know that. You know, there was a railroader who told a story about when he was a young man. He was learning to be an engineer. And he went through the inspection on a train just like you do on a plane. You go through and you inspect it beforehand. And the engineer that was training him took him through the process and then tapped on each of the wheels, walked around the train. And so he said to him, why are you tapping on the wheels? The guy said, I don't know. The engineer before me taught me to do that, and the engineer before him taught me to do that. I have no idea, okay? So sometimes we're not willing to really step into change. And you know, there are two kinds of change. There's the change that we choose, and that can be very painful at times. And then there's also the change that we don't choose, that's imposed upon us. And as we look at it, let's just talk briefly about one as an example of choice. You know, people choose to get married. And when they choose to get married, they, in some cases, take a little while to adjust to that marriage. They may not think so, but we do. All of us have. And just about the time that the new wife, for example, has gotten comfortable with the fact that her new husband doesn't leave the toilet paper just like she would like, and becomes comfortable with that, and then when he gets just about comfortable about talking about his feelings, something happens, and it's called a baby. And you know, a baby coming into one's life is kind of like in bowling, when you roll the ball and it hits the 10 pins and they go all over the place. That's what happens to our lives with babies many times. But we get used to that, and we adjust to that one baby, and then we get a second baby. And then we get a third baby. And sometimes we even have that fourth child. And what is the difference? How do we change in that process? Well, you see, with the first baby, when they drop their pacifier, we have it boiled, and we sanitize it, and we set it aside, and we use it, right? The second baby, we just put the pacifier under warm water in the faucet. The third baby, we pick it up, right? Put it in their mouth. The fourth baby, we let the dog fetch it and bring it to them. See, we change in those situations because we choose to. There's also those changes that are forced upon us. And those changes are changes that most of us would recognize: job loss, unexpected, relocation, death of children. Relocation can be a choice, but also can be a huge change. Death of children, siblings, and parents, health issues, financial challenges, caretaker, loss of home, legal issues, and these all bring stress to us. Now, if I stop right now, you can go home and worry about that, okay? But I'm going to try to give you a few ideas on why you can really come to manage that. And when we find ourselves facing this change, we must be willing to ask ourselves, what must I do different in order to use or adapt to this change? What must I do different in order to use or adapt to these changes? And as I do that, I want to share with you a few ideas about how maybe we might be able to cope with change and at the same time be a change agent during the change. It's still going to be stressful, but you know, we have a choice to manage our stress or let our stress manage us. And when we let our stress manage us, we run into all kinds of issues and challenges in our lives. Because when we allow our stress to manage us, we are not in alignment with the laws of the universe. We're not in alignment with who we are and what we are. Instead, we are acting like a human being, which we really aren't. But we're acting like one, and so therefore we end up out of alignment, and we end up with a life that says, oh my gosh, how did this happen? And I need to change. And so here are some of the ideas. The first thing, when you recognize that there's change in your life, examine the change. And then ask yourself this question: is the change the problem, or am I the problem? Tough question. You see, our attitude is so important. Am I letting my past experiences dictate my future, the way I've been? Or am I stuck? Am I resistant? Am I frustrated if I'm angry? Am I still living in the past? And if I answer those in affirmative, then I have some work to do, obviously. And so I have to ask myself, how do I learn to trust those around me so I can make the most of my relationships? That's where the change takes place. Usually when we are frustrated, when we are resistant, when we are confused, when we are upset with our folks around us, when we don't understand why the world's not working the way we want it to, it's usually because we are in those states of mind where we do not trust other folks to help us through it. That's what we're here for, to develop trust. And when you find yourself in a situation in this ministry where maybe there's not a level of trust, then think about that, and let's figure out together how to develop that trust so we can work together and make a difference in our oneness. Number two, so number one was examine the change. Number two is admit that change is here and will be a part of my future. Just admit it. This is a part of my future. The first step for me was to admit that I needed hearing aids, you know? And the first time I ever tried out for hearing aids, I was 50 years old, and the audiologist said, you have great hearing. You're just canceling your wife out. Oh, yeah. I said, oh. He said, but that's normal. And I said, oh, okay, fine. And I went home and told my wife it was normal. She didn't think it was funny. But anyway, so what we have to do is admit that change is part of our future. And the way we do that is we turn within for the answer. Once we admit the change is there, turn within for the answer to see how you start to manage the change. Let me give you a story that I think is a great example of change, probably one of the greatest, that happened in Acts 10, the book of Acts. Cornelius was a Roman centurion. And Cornelius had had 100 men under his command and lived in Jerusalem. And he was an interesting individual because what he did was he practiced Judaism. He also was a sympathizer with those that followed Jesus. Remember, in that day and time, a person who followed Jesus was Jewish, who thought the Messiah had come through Jesus. So they didn't see themselves as Christians. That came along when Paul started to evangelize. And so in that time, Peter and Paul, that's the truth, St. Peter and St. Paul, okay, were having a disagreement. And what the church in Jerusalem was saying is if you convert somebody, Paul, they have to also convert into Judaism, which means they have to eat kosher foods. And Paul was saying, no, that's not right. Well, at the time, Cornelius had this intuitive feeling that he ought to send his troops over, not 100 of them, but a few troops over, to ask Peter to come see him. What Cornelius didn't know is at the same time, Peter was up on the roof early in the morning, and he had a vision. And what he had a vision of was that God was asking him to sit at this banquet table. And it had all kinds of different foods in it. Foods that those who were Jewish would never eat. And God said, eat, and Peter said, no. And so the dream came back, and God said, eat, and Peter said, no. And it came back 4 times, and Peter said, no, I'm not going to do that. That's against the law. Now, if you stop with that story right there, some people have interpreted, and I don't believe this, that meant that everybody should stop being kosher. I think that's a choice, a healthy choice for many people, a religious choice for many people. But what happened was at about that time, the troops that that fella sent over, okay, that Cornelius sent over, arrived at Peter's house and said, come with us, we want you to go see Cornelius. And so Peter goes over. When Peter arrives, Cornelius has this huge meal sitting out, prepared for him. And what hits Peter is what God was saying to him in his dream, what he interpreted as God, was that I am supposed to accept everybody into what we now call Christianity. That was the real story. This was the change of the time. Jesus was not just for the Jewish folks. Jesus' message was not just for those who were Jewish. It was for everybody. Now, see, that's a huge change, a huge paradigm shift. It wasn't about the food. It was about, more importantly, that everybody could be brought in and know Jesus and even know the Jewish faith. But they didn't have to change their habits to do it. Knowing the message was more important than all of those laws that we have in our lives. And sometimes when we run into change, we have to admit that the change will be here and it will be part of my future, and we do that by discerning, as Peter did, what is ours to do. Now, once we understand and admit this change, we have to embrace the change. I've heard that in Chinese, the symbol for change is a combination of characters, crisis and opportunity. My sister-in-law shared that with me one time. She speaks fluent Chinese. And that crisis opportunity. So every change is a challenge to become who we really are. That's what it's saying. That in every change there's opportunity, in every change there is crisis, and in every change we change and we are able to grow if we're willing to. Marianne Williamson says that every problem implies a question. Are you ready to embody what you say you believe? How we respond to situations that present themselves determines what spiritual transformation will take place. So change is not just change in the world, it's change within ourselves. It brings about spiritual transformation. And she says that that's the spiritual meaning of every situation. And certainly we talk about that here at Unity, that every situation is a sacred opportunity for change, a sacred opportunity to grow. Now, one of the statements I read as I was doing the research and kind of grabbed me was, change is inevitable, growth is optional. Change is inevitable, growth is optional. Now I want you to turn and say that to a neighbor and let that neighbor say it to you, okay? It is, change is inevitable, growth is optional. Go ahead and do it right now. Find somebody. You have to stand up, you can stand up. Find somebody. There you go. All right. This is the 9 o'clock group. They don't stand up. Anyway, just kidding. Now, here's what I want you to say together. To yourself, not to anybody else. Change is inevitable. Together? Change is inevitable. Growth is optional. And I want you to remember that because it's an important concept and it makes a difference in how we manage our change. Even though it's uncomfortable, it presents these opportunities in our lives. Every experience we go through is a mirror. I used to have a person in El Paso every morning. I'd say, "Good morning, you look lovely today." And she says, "I'm just a mirror of who you are." I don't care what I'd say to her. I'm just a mirror of who you are. You know, isn't it true? That's what we are. And so, anyway, remember that. And then we have to not only embrace the change, we have to dance with the change. We have to look at what is happening in the moment and dance with the change as you allow it to lead you into the next moment of transformation. That's dancing with the change. It's beyond embracing, it's being a part of. It's being in harmony with, being in synchronicity with the change. And then the fifth one is manage the change. Don't be a victim of change, but the recipients of the benefits of the change. When you find yourself acting like, thinking like, and really examine this because, you see, the ego is really tricky. The ego will fool you. And you'll say, "Well, I'm not blaming anybody. Oh, I'm not a victim." And that's because you don't use the words, but you're feeling it. Because we've trained ourselves that that's not good language. That's not the nice thing to say. That we hide it from ourselves sometimes. When we really are being the victim in the circumstance. Inside of our head, maybe in our heart even. So don't be the victim of change, but the recipient of benefits of change. And then the sixth thing is be thankful for the change you feel. And as you do, what will happen is that through gratitude, we're able to see and experience the fun and the benefit of the change. When we're grateful for something, it changes our whole attitude as to how we step into it. So be joyous. Or first of all, be grateful for every change in your life. Even if it's difficult, even if it's challenging, even if it hurts. Be grateful before it's over. Because you can grow from it, you can learn from it, and you can even accept it, even if it's not your choice. And then the last thing is 7 is grow with the change. As I said, change is inevitable, growth is optional. Change, though uncomfortable, presents us with opportunities. You see, it's very important during times of great change to focus on things that don't change. You hear that? Focus on some of the things that don't change. I've still got my partner. I still have my home. I still have my faith. I still have my freedom. I still have my ability to go within myself and know Spirit and experience Spirit. Carl Jung was asked, "Do you know God?" Do you experience God? He said, "No, I know God." That's never changing. Remember what doesn't change. That the universe is unconditional love. That the universe is wisdom. That the universe is substance or energy that is changed by us for our benefit and the benefit of others, hopefully. And so as we understand those constants, it gives us some stability as we move through the change. And know also that change can happen so quickly that we have to embrace the change in order to actually live in the change. Now, I'm going to give you an example. One of the things that's happening, as we know, is artificial intelligence globally is growing through the internet, through technology, right? And so what happens is that they're saying that a few years from now, that you and I will be able to solve a problem by asking our computers for the answer. And what it will represent because of artificial intelligence is, let's just say, 1,000 of the greatest thinkers in the world coming together to come up with that conclusion for you. So what we're going to have to learn to do is not think sometimes, to let others and trust that process of thinking taking place. I mean, I know 1,000 people who are smarter than I am, who understand my challenge, can give me a better answer than I can come up with. It happens in every meeting I go to. I've got the answer, and somebody comes up with a better suggestion, a better way of doing it. And I go, aha. And so as we start to understand this concept, we have to understand that as we transition through change, that we are able to maintain a firm course, that we're able to maintain sensibility, that we are able to use the change, that we are able to grow and transform in our lives. In Jeremiah said, God said, I know the plans I have for you, plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope. I know the plans I have for you, plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope. No matter whether you call it God or whatever you call it, Spirit, the I Am, the Christ, the divinity, the Buddha, I don't care what you call it. It's inside of you. It's there. And it's always bringing you hope, and it's always bringing you a future. The only thing that can stop that is you. Thank you. And now, we have that opportunity to pray together. The first one I'd like to do, and I may have done it last week, but I want to do it again, is that Marcy Blosser went to Buffalo to kind of take the life support from her mother to say goodbye. And yet she prayed that that would be different. So when